20 years ago, H&M started their now famous designer collaborations with an inaugural collection designed by Karl Lagerfeld, the then creative director of the House of Chanel. I still remember this collection, and I'm sure many of you do too. And I think this is something that H&M is currently building on, because they are kind of re-releasing the styles of the past 20 years. They are dropping vintage items from these past designer collaborations over the next few days. While I'm filming this, there will be physical drops in stores across Europe and the US, and there will also be a big online drop worldwide on October 31st. So I thought it would be interesting to travel back in time, look at some selected collections and designs. Just as a side note here, this is a non-sponsored video, I'm just sharing my personal opinion and my research here. It is actually funny what we remember, because I can still remember the day I walked into that flagship store of H&M in Vienna in November 2004, and it was actually kind of an accidental shopping trip that I did on that day, because it was the afternoon of the day when the collection dropped, and I actually went into the building for another reason. H&M in the very same year moved into a very famous building on Vienna's Graben. It was the former home of Braun Co, which was a fashion institution. They had branches in Carlsbad, in Prague, in Berlin, even overseas in America. And that year it was announced that H&M would move into that building, and so many Viennese were shocked. They said, it's a heritage building, how can a brand like H&M move into this building? At the time, I don't think we already had the term fast fashion, but everybody was kind of shocked. And yes, Viennese people can be a bit nostalgic or conservative when it comes to buildings, but architecture is a very big part of the culture in Austria, so everybody was kind of surprised that now this fashion retailer from Sweden would move in. A lot of people were also a bit worried, because it is a very old building and now the masses would move into that building. I have to say, I entered because I was curious what H&M did. I didn't have the chance to take a look before that. And I entered the store, and it kind of feels like entering the Titanic. You have this big wooden staircase with the metal details. There's still the original lift. So it is kind of sad to see that it's used in that way. At the same time, you could say a lot of people can then see this architecture, this interior design. At the same time, I'm not really sure if people appreciate it, but this is a different story. Let's focus on the collaboration, not what I think about the use of the building. I remember that I went to this flagship store in the afternoon, because for some reason I did not really notice that there was this collaboration. I guess I was so focused on studying that I just didn't see the campaigns. And then I entered the store and I saw these interesting pop-up areas, let's put it like this, with the posters and also with the clothing. And then I realized, oh, there is a special collaboration or a special design by Karl Lagerfeld. I have to say, at the time I was not a big fan of Karl Lagerfeld himself due to the comments that he made back then in the media, but I was interested to see. I took a look at the clothes. I remember that there were some lingerie style tops in black. This is probably the thing that I remember most. The rest I have kind of forgotten. I don't remember that there were any particular things that I liked, so I did not buy anything that day. It could also have been the case that maybe everything was already sold by the time when I came, because as I said, when I entered the store it was already afternoon and maybe the hype was already gone. But it was interesting to see, and it was a new impulse for H&M at the time. As I said before, Karl Lagerfeld was the first designer to kickstart this series of collaborations. He ended up designing 30 items for H&M, and these items were sold across Europe and North America in 500 branches. And since then, I don't need to tell you, this kind of blew up. The next designer was Stella McCartney in 2005, and then were many others to follow. We had Versace, Balmain, Moschino, Mugler, so many different views and also many different designers. And it is kind of a win-win, I would say. It's on the one hand H&M promoting itself with these designers, adding another designer to the H&M brand, but at the same time, in some cases, we will see that it also benefited the designers to enter into this collaboration. And I also have some cases where I say maybe those designers today would not partner with H&M anymore, because there's more this view that H&M is fast fashion and a lot of designers would probably not collaborate with them anymore. And when I saw the current campaign, it actually made me think about these past collaborations. I was also thinking where I was when these collections dropped, if I bought something and how I felt about it. I have to say the biggest issue that I have with these collections, apart from H&M and fast fashion and this whole aspect, is the price point. If you look at the prices, they have increased a lot over time in these 20 years. When I looked at the Lagerfeld collection, I think the most expensive item was 149 euros. Still a lot of money 20 years ago, but when we then compare it to today, I saw, I think it was the Mugler collection, there was a coat for 750 euros. And yes, I understand the argument. It's still cheaper than going to the brand directly. So you could say H&M and this collaboration initiative brings these designs to the masses. Fine with me if this is what they want to do. When I spend 750 euros on fashion, I consider that a lot of money. So I want to do my research and then I really assess who is behind that design, what do they do in terms of sustainability, are they transparent, how do they treat their supply chain. So for me, there are many things that are important with such a purchase. And when I then think 750 euros at H&M, or I take it and support an independent label, an independent designer, where everybody also in the supply chain benefits from it, then I'd rather do that. But that's my personal opinion, and I'm really curious to hear your opinion, because I think these collections, they polarize a lot. Some people love them, some hate them. Let me know in the comments below. I really want to know what you think about them. Now let's look at this inaugural collection by Karl Lagerfeld. It was actually quite a bold move by the designer to accept this collaboration. I'm sure a lot of designers at the time would have been more apprehensive. I don't know if H&M asked other designers first, but he immediately said yes. I read this in quite a few books about him, that he was very excited about this collaboration, that he actually wanted to take this risk that other people might not have wanted to take. I think he understood the time, because when we think about the year 2004, this was when these brands like H&M, Zara, Mango slowly had established themselves on the high streets in Europe and North America. They were slowly also branching out worldwide, and I remember this feeling about these brands. Today we look at them and say it's fast fashion, we don't want to buy there anymore. This is a different development. But when they came to Europe, when they opened up, it was quite exciting. I remember my mom went to Paris and she came back with a yellow top that she bought at Mango for me, with cutouts at the shoulders. And it did not feel fast fashion back then. It felt really special. There was this very nice bag, a paper bag, and then it was also wrapped in paper with the Mango logo. Needless to say, Mango was not in Austria at the time. So for me, this was something from Paris, or something that you can only get abroad. So it was very, very special. For us teenagers, it was actually exciting. Suddenly there were these trendy and fashionable clothes that we could afford. It was all really fun, and it took some time until we realized what fast fashion actually meant, what the impact of fast fashion is on the planet. But in 2004 or in the early 2000s, the view on it was very different, and it was very common that you go to H&M, but you also shop at Chanel if you had the money. And Lagerfeld was always a very good observer, so he noticed these developments. And I think I also read it in one of the books about Karl Lagerfeld, that he actually said he noticed that at the Atelier, or at Chanel in general, a lot of the women could not afford to dress head to toe in Chanel, so they bought something similar or Chanel inspired, and then maybe they saved up for a Chanel bag. So he saw what was going on, and I think he also saw the opportunity for himself to collaborate with H&M at the time. And as I said, I doubt that Lagerfeld was threatened by H&M and the likes. I think for him it was more a new movement, something that inspired him also to see where the market was going. Of course, if you work at Chanel, you can be a bit more relaxed about that stuff, because the average person who can shop at Chanel is different from the average person who shops at H&M. But still, as I said before, this mixing was also something, or is still something, that people do. And I also do think that he was very smart, because he probably saw that if he establishes himself with the customer at H&M, it also makes his other brands, not only Chanel, but also his namesake brand, or also Chloé or Fendi, for example, more aspirational. And this is exactly what happened. Lagerfeld was already known in fashion. Also, he was known in the German-speaking countries, mostly due to his comments that he made, the very polarizing comments that I also mentioned in my other video about him. But this collaboration was the next move. It basically meant for him global fame. It was the next step in building his global public persona. And I think since then, everybody knows Lagerfeld. When you see the signature hairstyle with the ponytail, the sunglasses, everything that he stood for, this is what people started to notice. He also modeled himself for the posters, and he was also in the video himself. So you can already tell that it was not only beneficial for H&M to have the creative director of Chanel as their collaboration partner, but that there was also a big benefit for Lagerfeld himself. And another reason how he catapulted himself to global fame was the comments that he made about the collaboration, because it was not only positive comments. He also said in an interview with the German Stern that he was kind of upset after this whole collaboration. I have a quote for you in German. Was ich entworfen habe, ist eine Mode für schmale, schlanke Leute. Das war die ursprüngliche Idee. So if we translate this into English, it would be, what I have designed is fashion for slim people. That was the original idea. And of course, a lot of people were upset about this. I don't remember H&M reacting to it. At least now when I did the research for the video, I didn't find anything. But this was typical of Lagerfeld. He always made these really polarizing and very mean comments, today very often not political correct. I do think that it was a marketing strategy that he applied. I said this in my other video about him, but I remember hearing about this back then, and then I was actually glad that I didn't buy anything at the time, because when I heard the comments I was like, okay, well, I only saw the tops in 36 and 38, so this is US size 6 and 8, and I don't think this is a very big size. It's actually on the smaller end, I would say, for average people, maybe not for models on the runway. And the reason might have been maybe the big sizes. I didn't see them because they were already sold out in the afternoon. I doubt it. This was definitely a comment that I didn't appreciate that he made, even though I have said in other videos I appreciate what he did as a designer. But these comments were very polarizing. But it might also have been a calculated risk that H&M wanted to take, because maybe they already expected him to say something like this, because as we see today, very often it's the outrage factor, and even after the collaboration was already in the stores, he made these comments, and then it might have given it another boost. I don't know, this is just an idea that I have in mind. I would like to hear what you think about this. Lagerfeld also said about this collaboration that he intentionally did not design anything to Chanel, because Chanel is copied enough. So it's very much Lagerfeld himself, or what he did at his own label, I would say. It's this signature black and white that we also saw last year at the exhibition of the Metropolitan Museum in New York, a line of beauty which was a tribute to Karl Lagerfeld. So we had these cashmere items, there were the blazer signature things when we think about Lagerfeld himself. So I think this was something, also a statement that he wanted to make, that Lagerfeld is not only Chanel, because when we think about it, Lagerfeld actually did a lot of other projects within fashion. But as I said before, he was also on the posters, he was also in the video, the promotional video. So we can see the many interests of Karl Lagerfeld, because he loved photography, he loved movies, he loved literature. So this is another thing that we can see here in this collaboration with H&M, and this move to design something for H&M again shows that he was always very much interested in the zeitgeist. In the following year, in 2005, Stella McCartney, the British designer, was the second one to collaborate with H&M, and I again remember that day. Again, I did not queue up in the morning. I also don't know if the hype was the same for this second collection, because as I said before, I don't know if there was a hype for Lagerfeld. I was not there. This was also pre-Instagram, and it also felt the same for Stella McCartney, because when I arrived at the shop in the afternoon, there were still quite a few items that you could try on in your size. And I think this whole hype came a bit later, where people were actually fighting about certain items. I will cover this in a bit. And that year I bought a tuxedo style coat in black. And it was less that I wanted to have a piece of Stella McCartney, it was more that I found this coat really interesting, and I actually really loved that coat. I wore it for years. Unfortunately, it reached its end of its lifetime in 2013 and I gave it away. But this was a very smart coat that I really liked. So there were some of these collaborations where you could get really nice designs, really high quality items as well. And what I found interesting about this collaboration is that Stella McCartney was the second one to partner with H&M. And when I think about Stella McCartney today, the first thing that comes to mind for me is that she's a pioneer in sustainability. So this is one of the examples where I think maybe she would see that collaboration differently now than she did back then. But I think, again, we have to put it in the context of the time. In the early 2000s, first of all, sustainability was not on the radar yet, or not on the radar as it is now. And I think back then most people associated with Stella McCartney the sleek and classic design, less that she really worked on sustainability. And probably if she had advertised that, more people would have not shopped with Stella McCartney for that reason. That's just my assumption. So I think maybe back then she wanted to use the opportunity to collaborate with H&M to also position herself as a globally known designer. And I hope this was successful for her. I would like to interview her one day what she thinks about this collaboration now, because I think looking at it with today's lens, it looks a bit different. And this brings me to the next collaboration in 2006, Viktor and Rolf, the Dutch design duo founded by Victor Horsting and Rolf Sneuren. And I think the motivation here for them might have been similar to Stella McCartney. At the time, they were already known within the fashion industry, but they were not household names as they became later on. So I think they also had this motivation that H&M would give them credibility. Looking at it today, maybe H&M also addressed rather lesser known designers at the time, because it may have been easier. Maybe the big ones didn't want to take the risk. As I said before, this could also backfire, and maybe a younger label or a younger designer is more willing to take the risk. This could be one interpretation. I remember this day in 2006 because I have to admit I queued up for this. This was the first one, and I think Matthew Williamson was the second and last one where I actually did it. I waited in front of the store, and then it was funny because they opened the doors and it was nowhere as crazy as it is now, but back then we found it crazy, and then everybody ran in and people started grabbing things, and I'm usually somebody, I want to actually have a look what I buy. And then I was just looking at the desk and I saw all these like outfits flying around, and suddenly I see a friend from university and she just basically shouts across this desk, "Look at us, how silly are we, but somehow it is fun." And this is something I have to say, it might be really silly, but at the time it was fun. It was kind of exciting to see this. I don't remember what I actually bought that day. I think I did buy a t-shirt with kind of like a heart print or something on it. I still have these tights with the heart shape and this like detail in the back, which I really like, and I actually found them in my closet when I did the research for this video. And this is so typical of me because I bought them, then I was scared to wear them. I have to say my tights rip really easily, so they don't really have a long lifetime, and I think because it was a special edition, I wanted to keep the tights, so I never wore them, but now looking at them, it's actually a shame if they are just in the drawer. And I never wear them. I also remember the wedding dress which was featured in the campaign. I don't really remember it because of the campaign itself. It was more because I remember that some ladies at H&M were trying it on, and for me it was kind of funny that people would buy a wedding dress at H&M, but they were really excited about this. So this also showed how much the fashion market had changed. And I do remember there was a hype around this collection, mainly on TV and in the print magazines. You also have to remember this was 2006. This was before Instagram, before we got most of our news online. I remember that some lifestyle shows on TV in the evening covered it. There were also interviews with the designers. So you could say it moved beyond the fashion world for the very first time, I would say. And there was also a launch event in Bel Air. Also Lagerfeld and Stella McCartney had launch events. Lagerfeld actually celebrated at the rooftop restaurant of the Centre Pompidou in Paris, and people say he made a rock star entrance surrounded by the models. This was also carefully planned and curated, we could say. And Viktor Rolf and H&M hosted a big party for this launch, and it was actually a theme party because it should be like a stag night. They had burlesque dancers dancing to Like a Virgin. At the end of the show, there was even the cutting of a wedding cake. So it was clearly themed, and over time you will see these parties and launch events, and also the concepts around these collections became much bigger. You could also see that probably the budget became bigger, so this is also interesting to notice. In 2007, Roberto Cavalli was the first Italian designer to enter into this collaboration with H&M. And when you look at the posters and also the designs, it was very much Roberto Cavalli. It was a lot of animal print. It was very party, so very signature Roberto Cavalli. So of course it was glitter and glamour, so there was a hype around this, and I find it interesting because in the following year, in 2008, the partner was Comme des Garcons. And when you look at the designs, it was actually one of the more wearable collections. I also found it interesting because it brought avant-garde to the masses, so I always like this mix of art and then also fashion and business. But I noticed during the research for this video that there are very few pictures actually of this collection. It does not seem as hyped as Cavalli and the others. Needless to say, Comme des Garçons is a different type of brand with a different target market than these big brands, but I was a bit surprised, and you could also see the difference in the collaboration. And H&M actually used this collaboration to celebrate something, or maybe the celebration was the reason for partnering with the Japanese designer Rei Kawakubo in the first place, because the collection dropped first in Japan. H&M back then opened their second store in Tokyo, so first the collection dropped in the 2 stores in Tokyo, and then 5 days later it dropped worldwide. Moving on to my favorite, and you can probably already tell it was Matthew Williamson in 2009. I bought actually quite a few things during that drop, and I still have quite a few items. Unfortunately, this bag, you can already see something that I mentioned in another video about garments and accessories also decaying. Unfortunately, this bag was made from plastic, so you can already feel that the material is reaching the end of its lifetime. But I have to say, I may be biased. I love the designs of Matthew Williamson. I think this was one of the best collaborations they ever had. And it was very much him, because he is very colorful with his designs. He very often uses birds like the peacock. You can see the peacock itself on dresses, but it was also here. The detail of the bag was the peacock feather. Exactly that is what you can also see with the swimwear. So we have this shawl here, actually a pareo with birds. I really liked that pattern. I also bought the bikini that you can see in the commercial also. Unfortunately, I think I already had to toss that one because, you know, with bikinis, the material after some time, it just also decays. It's the same story, but I really, really liked it. It was so much fun. It was something different. And I do have to say, I remember a lot of people in that store that day. Again, I queued up for it. And a lot of people were actually fighting. There were women who were taking items from the piles from another person. I remember 2 people in an argument who had it first, which was a bit, over the top, I would say. But I think the reason was there were so many really wearable items during that collection. I also bought pink shorts. I also unfortunately can't find them anymore. But there was also a very smart bright blue suit with green details. And every time I see this suit somewhere or I think about Matthew Williamson, I regret not buying it because it looked so smart. I rarely have this, that I regret not buying something, but this is definitely one of the items where I regret it. In 2010 and 11, H&M actually collaborated with 3 designers. It was Choo, Sonia and then Lanvin. And I don't remember the campaigns that much anymore. I think at the time I kind of lost interest in these collaborations. So please forgive me if I have a biased view here where I say the hype was not the same. Maybe there was an even bigger hype and I was just not part of it. Choo, I remember looking at the shoes because I found it interesting because H&M is not really known for their shoes. Yes, they have footwear, but you go to H&M, I think, for the clothing. So I found this interesting, but I remember looking through the designs and then they were just not my style. I remember these flats that were very round and with the short top of the foot. That was not really what I liked. Maybe it was interesting that a shoe brand like Jimmy Choo also came to H&M. I do have to say, looking at the video of the Sonia Rykiel campaign now, I think it's quite nice because it's very much Sonia Rykiel. It was basically signature Sonia Rykiel designs at a lower price point for the customer at H&M, which I think is a fine idea. I can't judge the quality. As I said, I did not really see that collection at the time. I don't really know what the items looked like apart from the pictures and the videos that I found online. What I did find very interesting was the campaign for Lanvin. First of all, the clothes I liked because there were quite a few interesting dresses and also this zebra trench coat that I found quite nice. I thought, okay, this was one of the collections that I missed, but maybe I would have bought something if I hadn't missed it. And I also find this video commercial really funny because they turned it into kind of a story. It takes place in a hotel. The main storyline is that a beautiful woman opens her door. There is a man at her door and he offers her different things. First, he brings flowers. She shuts the door, turns around and says to herself, I don't want flowers, I want lover. The next time he comes with a diamond necklace. Again, she shuts the door and says she doesn't want diamonds, she wants lover. And then he comes and brings her this dress and she's very happy. So that's the main storyline. And then you see other women and men in the designs, and the women are also seeing other women with their dresses on, and then they have conversations. And also Alba Elbas, the then creative director of the brand, was in the video. So I found that very interesting, quite fun. It looked like a really nice campaign. I think one of the campaigns that probably everyone remembers from these collaborations is the one with Versace in 2011. Even today, when I think about that campaign, I immediately think about the designs, especially the leather jackets and leather dresses. And there was a very, very big hype around it. And this is also something that Donatella Versace herself can do very well. She has long been the brains behind the marketing of the brand. People may criticize her designs, but a lot of things that we associate with Versace today, also the collaborations with the supermodels, for example, was actually his sister Donatella. And I think this collaboration with Versace was also a very smart move. There were these ups and downs of the brand after Gianni Versace himself passed away in 1997. And in 2011, it was again something, I think, cementing the brand globally again. So there was this big campaign. There was, of course, a launch party in New York where Prince and Nicki Minaj performed. As I said, I remember the leather items and I liked a few of the black designs. I have to say I did not like these colorful prints and the colors in general. I think the colors themselves on their own were already difficult. You can see that when you look at certain dresses, for example, but then also the combination sometimes was too much for me. I'm sure that Donatella Versace was doing it on purpose. It was just not really my style, and I would like to know what you thought about that collection. And this is a thing with Versace in general. It can be a bit borderline tacky, but Gianni Versace always managed to pull it off, and sometimes I feel this is not always there. And with this particular collection, I think it actually went into the wrong way. But as I said, that's my personal opinion. It was also the first time where I did not buy something because of the price, because I actually really liked the leather jacket and the black leather dress. But then when I saw it, I actually thought about this price point and what I said before about rather supporting an independent label, an independent designer, or buy something secondhand. The next year had a very interesting collaboration because it was with Maison Margiela, and I don't know how many people actually remember that. I think the flashier ones like Versace and maybe Cavalli or later on Mugler are more the ones that we have in mind, maybe even the Balmain one. And then the more reduced ones, the avant-garde ones, they are a bit forgotten. I found it interesting because similar to what I said about Comme des Garcons, when you look at the clothes, they are quite timeless, quite interesting. It is a very particular style, you have to like it, but that's just what these brands stand for. And then also what I found interesting was the video to promote the clothes. It felt like an art installation. The models were moving on a white floor and there was some sand on it, and then they were moving through the sand showcasing these pieces. So it felt like a commercial, but it also had this artsy perspective, and it was basically similar to Sonia Rykiel. It was Margiela, but at a lower price point. From what I can tell on the pictures and in the videos, it actually looked quite good. There were also some signature items, like for example the white stitching on the outer side on dark garments, so this is very much Margiela also. So this is quite interesting, and it is actually something that you could still wear today if this is your style. In the same year there was Marni. I think it was a bit forgotten. I thought it was quite interesting also, but I don't think it's one of the collections that most people remember. And similarly also Isabel Marant, a year later in 2013, had her collaboration with H&M. And looking at the interviews and also the collection, I actually think this is one of the most interesting collaborations. Even though Isabel Marant very often is not my personal style, but it's always this one item that I like. And I think it was similar in this H&M collection. I think the knitwear items and also the jackets looked really nice. The next year was the collaboration with Alexander Wang, and this was very much active wear. I think this was also just the context of the time. When we look at 2014, it was a lot about active wear. It became, unfortunately, more and more accepted to also go outside in active wear, or when you do sports you wanted something more fashionable. So I think this was a very smart move by H&M to also have this collaboration with somebody like Alexander Wang who can pull something like this off. And then in the long run they also established themselves more in this active wear sphere, I think. The 2015 collaboration was heavily advertised. I think there was a real hype around it again. It was Balmain under Olivier Rousteing. Rousteing had previously worked for Roberto Cavalli and then was hired as the creative director of Balmain. And he actually said that he had already followed the works of Roberto Cavalli with H&M, and he found it really exciting that now it is his turn to bring Balmain to the H&M customer. I have to say I remember it. I also remember that I just didn't like it that much, but I think it's because a lot of the interpretations currently at Balmain are just not my style. That's a personal view. But I have to say the collection, or also how they marketed the collection, was very, very smart. So it was very much rockstar, similar to Karl Lagerfeld. This collection was not announced at a fashion event. Olivier Rousteing actually attended the Billboard Music Awards and he walked the red carpet with the models Jordan Dunn and Kendall Jenner in his designs. And whether we like it or not, it was very smart because these names already drew attention to this collection. There was also a big launch event where the Backstreet Boys performed on Wall Street, and it was just a really, really big thing. So I think whether we like the designs or not, I think that's a very successful collection in business terms. I'm sure everything sold out immediately. I would also like to know not only what you think about this collection, but if some of you actually bought something from the collection, because I would be interested. What did you think about the quality of the designs, the real Balmain versus H&M version of the designs? How did it turn out, and are you still happy with these items? In 2016 and 17 there was a collaboration with Kenzo and then also with Erdem. Again, both I did not really notice. Kenzo, I think, looked very much like Kenzo the brand. I think it might have also been an homage to Kenzo Takada, who retired in the late 1990s from the brand. Erdem, I have to say, I always like his design, so I think this collection was also very nice at H&M. As I said, I can't really judge the quality of the garments, but what I really liked was this video, the commercial by Baz Luhrmann. I hope I said the name correctly. It was again very thoughtful, in a way very artsy to have such a movie. And then I found all these dresses very pretty. There were also jackets with the floral motifs, which I very much enjoyed, and this would have been something, if I had known about the collection, maybe I would have considered purchasing one of those. And then we have 2018 and 19, Moschino and Giambattista Valli, blockbuster collections in my opinion, because they also created a very big hype, probably more than the previous Erdem did. Moschino was very much Jeremy Scott under Moschino, so if I say I did not really like the items, it's more because I did not really enjoy that version of Moschino that much. There were some collections or items under Jeremy Scott that I liked, but very often I just found it too gimmicky, and this is exactly what I also felt about this H&M collaboration. Giambattista Valli, there were quite a few really nice garments that he designed. I just have to say that these dresses that were modeled by Kendall Jenner, the short pink one or blush pink one and the red one, kind of overshadowed the whole collection, because this was the dress that I also remembered. This was the dress we probably all saw on Instagram and in the magazines. But there were so many other garments that were really pretty. There was another blush pink dress with like a lace motif. There were these coats and jackets with floral embroidery, I think, or prints. Very nice, but as I said, overshadowed by the dress. And I remember that year I actually followed the drop of the collection because I was invited at a wedding and I was looking for outfits, and then I even thought about one of these Giambattista Valli dresses. But then again, I remember I looked at the price point. I don't remember it. I think it was around 300 euros or something like this. And at the time I thought, okay, again, it is Giambattista Valli, but it is for H&M. And then I'm repeating myself what I said before. I looked at it again and thought, okay, it's Giambattista Valli, it's kind of nice, but maybe I spent my money somewhere else. And then I decided not to buy one of these dresses. And the other point I have to admit was also that everybody knew the dresses. Everybody would know that this was Giambattista Valli for H&M, and this is kind of something that I personally don't really like, if everybody immediately recognizes what it is. So this is just a bit of trivia about myself and how I make my purchase decisions. This doesn't mean that I thought the collection was not good or that I don't like this collaboration. I think everybody is entitled to their view, and there are many views about these collections, and this is just my motivation for how I buy certain things. I think H&M skipped 2020 for the reason that we all know. Also, I think it would have been, in my opinion, in bad taste if they had dropped something in November 2020, also after the whole industry treated all their supply chain, especially in countries like India and Bangladesh. So I think there was a reason for that. In 2021, there were two collaborations with the British designer Simone Rocha and also with Toga Archives. Both, I think, were kind of out there, but I'm not sure if this was still because we were all in pandemic mode. I personally didn't notice them. I think there were quite a few nice garments in these collections, but I don't remember really thinking about the collection at the time. I think we were all in a different place. And also in 2021, the Indian designer Sabyasachi Mukherjee did a collaboration with H&M, and this for me again is interesting. Yes, we are talking here about fast fashion, but Sabyasachi is very, very famous within India and some other countries. But in Europe and in America, he slowly becomes more known. He slowly establishes himself. But this was more, I think, something where he also wanted to put his name more on the global stage. So needless to say, I'm a big fan of Indian fashion. I found it interesting that the Swedish brand partnered with the Indian designer. The clothes looked quite nice. I'm not sure if I would say from this Indian clothing perspective if it's something very special. We saw block print and also the typical kurti style tops and all of these things that when you know Indian fashion, it's nothing super special, but I think it's more the idea bringing Indian fashion to the world, we could say. In 2022, H&M followed that up with a collaboration with Iris Apfel. And it's quite interesting because at that time Iris Apfel was basically a global celebrity also in fashion and outside of the industry. And it is one of these collaborations that H&M did rather with the personality than with the brand. There was a similar collaboration, I think, in 2012 with Anna Della Russo. And I think I read something about Liz Hurley doing a collection. I have to admit, I did some research online about all of these collections and I focused on the brands. I think maybe there were additional special collections by other designers or let's say personalities with some kind of fashion related background. So if there are some collections that I didn't cover here but you found them interesting, please let me know in the comments below. And last year, another blockbuster, Mugler, was really, really big. I remember it being everywhere. I think this is also this Instagram effect, and maybe this was also the first time that people started to think about fashion after the pandemic. There was the videos. I saw so many influencers also in these signature Mugler designs. And I don't need to describe it. It's the signature cuts. It's also this kind of electrifying feeling when you watch the commercial. So it's very much Mugler. It is a blockbuster. It must have been a very successful collection. And in the same year, there was actually also a collaboration with Paco Rabanne. But for some reason, I think this whole hype around Mugler, most people noticed more that Mugler collection than the Rabanne. I have to admit, I didn't notice it that much, even though it's very much signature Rabanne, the big sequins, 1960s feel, actually quite nice. I also liked the style of this video commercial, so I'm actually a bit surprised that I didn't notice it more. I think it was more the hype around Mugler that we all noticed, and maybe Rabanne was the second collection that was rather in the shadow of this big blockbuster collection. So we now have covered the past 20 years, and at the moment, as I said before, H&M is doing something special. They are dropping vintage items in the physical stores and also online on October 31st. And it will be quite interesting to see which items they selected, how much they will have sold by the time that they dropped online and also in the physical stores. And I'm also very curious about the prices. What will be the feedback on the prices? Will they be very expensive? Because we know some of these items have become kind of collector's items. So if you have time and if you're interested in it, I actually recommend to browse all the websites, these platforms like Vestiaire Collective, Vinted, even the Austrian/German marketplace Willhaben also has quite a few of these H&M collaborations online. So if you don't want to wait until next week when everything goes online, maybe you can do some research on these platforms and maybe you get them at a better price than next week. I don't know. We don't know yet about the prices and what this collection will actually look like. I'm very curious to hear your point of view. What do you think about these H&M collaborations? Are they still interesting, or is it just too much marketing? Is it too big? Is it just promoting fast fashion in times where we should think about sustainability? Let me know in the comments below. I also want to know if you have ever bought items from these collections. Which collections did you like? Do you have a special memory like me from these collections? Also, please let me know in the comments below. And now I also have to do a bit of self-promotion. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, and if you haven't done it yet, please subscribe to my channel. If you're interested in reading more fashion-related articles, you can also head over to my website, thepinklookbook.com, and you can also check out my fashion label, Pelagona. And speaking of collaborations, I've mentioned Balmain before, doing a collaboration with H&M, but I also did another video where it was not a collaboration of the brand and the fast fashion brand. It was Pierre Balmain himself collaborating with Queen Sirikit of Thailand. So maybe this is also interesting for you. It's a very different perspective. Thank you very much for watching this video, and see you in the next one.